another thing that folks do a lot, which is also fantastic, is trying to pull senators and representatives out of the chamber when we're in session to speak with them about an issue. And sometimes when people do lobby days, that's basically what they do, is they are going to the rope lines. There's like a velvet rope that separates people who are lobbying on the rope line from the door of each chamber, so you can't get right up to the door. But it's not a big space. It's like we have like, this much space where only like staff and legislators can go, and then the public's here. And so what you do is, and that can be a very effective way of what a lot of people do with a lobby day. They have their day set. They have a senator, representative, staff arrange a room for them to meet in so that they can all meet early that day, go over tips, do's and don'ts, and a lot of times get breakfast or what have you, and then they all disperse. They go over like, who's your representative, and what are you going to say to them, and then everyone disperses. So then what you do is you're up on the rope line, and there are people that run what's called the page desk, and the pages are kids 12 and up who every day work the session, different kids every day, that bring us notes. So you would go to the page desk, you would pick up little slips of paper that they give you, and then you would say, ours are yellow and the House are white, and you would say, I'm here to see Senator Parent, and you can sort of like, has like some check boxes, and you can also write a message. So then, you could say, I just want to say this, or you could say, can you come out for a minute, or whatever it is. And so then the senator comes out and you have the opportunity to chat with them. So that can be a really effective way too, especially early in the session before it gets super nutty, but really all session long, of trying to have targeted conversations with people that you are hoping to convince on something. So say you are advocating on the independent redistricting bill that I've been working on. Well, and then you know that the most immediately relevant senators are the ones that are on the redistricting committee, which is actually called the reapportionment committee. So you have your list and you're like, all right, I want to try to talk to all of these folks, and it may even be that you've already gotten together and gotten advice from me or someone else, and I say, these are the 5 I think you should spend your time on. I know that these people are going to vote for it, whatever. You could do that, or you could try to talk to everybody, whatever is your druthers. And you would then have your little list and fill out notes for all of them, and you would stand there, and then the page, really you're kind of like just scanning to see when they come out, but a page can also help you. So sometimes the pages will say to me, like, I can take you out to them right now. Or like I might say, I can't come out right now, or I gotta listen to this debate, but tell me what they look like. Tell me what he or she looks like, so I know kind of who I'm looking for. So, and a lot of the time people will come out. Sometimes they won't, but a lot of the time they will. And that can be a really effective way of having these like shorter conversations, because it's gonna be very difficult for you to schedule time to sit down with any legislator, especially one that's not your own, during the session, because there's just so many committee meetings and other things going on. So that really is an effective way of trying to just pin them down briefly, but I would be organized, I would plan it out, I would have your group, I would get your talking points. It can be really helpful if you draw up a flyer, just of your points, the things that you're trying to get across. Support blah blah, oppose blah blah. I'm so-and-so, I live in, XYZ, and I want to talk to you about this legislation. Here are my thoughts about it, and have kind of, you're organized enough, which all of you would be, to sort of know what your savvy salient points are, and have maybe those 4 or 5 things and bullet points on some flyers, and then you would give it to the legislator as they depart, so they take it with them. And I always think that's really wise, because there's just a lot of things going on. It can be in one ear out the other. That way they've got it. And you could also drop it off with their legislative assistants in their offices, if you wanted to. You wouldn't have to, but that's another way to, not as good, but if you didn't get somebody, you could take it to their office and and have a conversation with their assistant and explain who you are, and then ask, hopefully you've made maybe enough of a rapport with that assistant and made enough of an impression that they would actually talk to their senator. So-and-so came by to see you, they gave me this, they wanted you to know blah, blah. You know, it's not as good as you getting to speak with them, but it's still good. So to that end, there are some people that end up, we don't set the schedule, and we set it as we go along, which is frustrating because for groups that are planning lobby days, they can't totally know for sure that we'll be in session on the day that they've picked. But they can just kind of try to do an educated guess and have it work out most of the time. But it is kind of not great if a group sets a lobby day and then we're not in session, because yes, some folks will be around, but most of the people that live, you know, especially down in Savannah or whatever, they're going to have gone back for the, you know, so if you're not with a group that's organized a lobby day and you are able to do it on a little bit shorter notice, you could pick a day where for sure you know we're in session.
Tend to be shy to go one-on-one for lobby day.
Yeah, sure.
What else can they do?
Well, I always say, you know, emailing and calling are very powerful as well. I assume that if someone is probably not feeling comfortable yet to talk, you know, be as aggressive as to call someone out, they probably might not really want to testify either. But that in some way can be less scary. Do you know what I mean? Because when you're trying to call someone out, you're sort of like, I'm ready to discuss this with them. You know, whereas if you're testifying, you just get to like, on an issue, on a bill that you really care about, if you have a relevant thought, I mean, and everything's relevant. I mean, it can be a family story. It can be just like, this is what I feel about this. It's not, you know, sometimes I feel like in Congress, they subpoena people, you know? We don't subpoena anybody. It's literally like, who comes? Who comes that cares about this? There's no criteria. You don't have to have like a PhD in it. The sponsor of the bill will usually have tried to, you know, gathered some advocates that have worked on this or that have some expertise. But the more people that come, the better, you know? So that can be less scary in a way because you just are making your statement and you're not gonna, you know, it's like less drama with people moving in all these different directions. So there's that, but email and calling is always very, very helpful. And many people do that and they just leave a message and they send emails. You can also send letters and those are also helpful. So those are really good. Postcards are good. Yeah.
A few months back there was a news piece about a group called ALEC that gives scholarships to the legislators to come in that are favorable, sponsored by certain industries and businesses, and then gives them blank legislation to fill in.
That's right. It's called model legislation.
How influential is ALEC in Georgia?
You know, it is influential. I feel like, and I could be erroneous, but I feel like it was more influential in the past because it had a few scandals and it kind of got more exposed. For a while, they had like really managed to operate somewhat under the radar and really get these model bills out in all these states. It was like, well, no one was paying attention to the state level, and it was very damaging. But then they had a few scandals, including that they were just like they were like supporting the stand your ground laws. And then when Trayvon Martin was killed, that kind of blew up in their face. And a lot of their sponsors pulled out at that point, like Coke I know did, and some others that were just like, this thing's too controversial, it's too right wing, it's not sort of, because for a while they've been able to sort of keep this image as like a benign sort of, you know, oh, we look at state issues. But I mean, it still is going to be influential, you know, especially it's not influential among Democrats, you know, by and large. Among some Republicans, they do pay for you to go. That's not particularly common. There's conferences all the time, and there's like scholarships for all of them.
Are there ways to find out which legislators take advantage of these?
There are. I wonder if they have to list. It should be that they have to list. Yes, that should all be publicly available. If any organization is giving a gift to a legislator, it should show up on their report that they're required to file. So I've seen news articles in the past that go through and say these legislators all went to ALEC. So yeah, there are ways, but I could probably find out for you people that are doing that research, because I feel like if you don't know what to do, it could be really time consuming. But I've gotten a spate of emails recently where people some group is out there asking people about whether they are liking ALEC, because I've gotten like 5 or 6 recently. So, yes.
You mentioned earlier on that several people are going to probably resign their seats because they can't fundraise during the session. Will those numbers change the voting tallies? Will that affect that they'll need more votes or less votes for?
It will, it depends on when folks resign. You know, theoretically, they could resign and have there would be time to have a special election to fill their seats by the time we gavel in. If they have not, then yes, it does impact it. So this past year, when Judson Hill had resigned to run for the 6th congressional district, they were down that seat, and that meant that they couldn't pass constitutional amendments without more Democratic support. Because right now, in the Senate, they basically have a 2/3 supermajority, and that means that with no defections from their side, they could pass constitutional amendments without a single Democratic vote. That was impossible without that seat filled. So it can impact it. But I'm kind of thinking most of them would get filled by the session, but I'm not sure. We'll go back there and then over here. Yeah.
In terms of the question of election integrity, there's been, in addition to the gerrymandering problems in Georgia, there's been a lot of conversation about our voting machines.
Yes.
And the no paper trail.
That's right.
And the way it's done, the whole story with Kennesaw, I've been trying to keep up with that. And I'm wondering, is there any indication that anybody's going to try to put through legislation to fix that?
I think so. I absolutely think that we'll see legislation to fix that. I'm hopeful that the amount that the issue has been raised to the general public will also sort of provide the kick to appropriate the funds. And that all, kind of comes out of the governor does the budget. So theoretically, the governor could, earmark funds for the Secretary of State's office to buy the appropriately updated machines with the auditable paper trail. But that's like what, so some of there are lawsuits about them, and so hopefully they succeed, but even if they don't, the goal is to raise awareness among the general public where people are demanding that they feel like we have elections with integrity in Georgia.
I mean, they have lawsuits in Georgia?
Uh-huh.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yes, against those very machines.
Against commissioners.
Yes.
So I know a lot of us have been making phone calls and sending emails, etc. I'm curious to know how much of that information gets passed on, like your name, your zip code, oppose, don't oppose, that's it, or even that much, or an interesting story you tell, or does it depend on the aid, or does it depend, because sometimes I feel like they just say, thank you very much, I'll be sure that Senator so-and-so knows.
I think that's right.
But my question is, what do they know? What do they pass on?
I mean, every office is going to be different because every legislator is going to be different about how they approach that information. So my assistant writes all of them down, and then she kind of organizes them for me so that I can see, and my district is pretty, folks in the 42nd, generally are fairly like-minded about things. Like, certainly there's some disagreement, but see, when I had the district in North DeKalb in the House, that was like a more evenly split district as far as partisan leanings. So in that district, it was like more relevant in some ways for me to be able to like really weigh. Like, I kind of know in general how my folks feel about things. That doesn't mean I don't pay attention to those things. I do. It's just that they rarely hold any kind of surprise for me. So for people whose districts are a little bit more, marginal, they may hold even greater weight. But it's all going to matter. It's all going to depend on what process that legislator has set up with their staff, and whether they check their own email. And most I think a lot do. And then some of it's like personal preference, because I've heard some legislators say, do not send those form emails where it says like insert name, the more of those I get, the more I want to vote, do the opposite thing. And I just look at them like, well, I don't agree with you. Because to me, even if it isn't some personalized thing, if all those people still were on that website or whatever is the generator because they care about that issue and sent them, and I've gotten like 600 emails against something, well, that matters to me. And I feel like more legislators would be like that than the other. Because why wouldn't you? I mean, basically, it still means 600 people care about that issue. And there was one weird thing that happened this session. So it was kind of a local thing, but the lieutenant governor had appointed this gentleman out of Forsyth County to some board. And immediately we started all getting, and the Senate had to confirm the appointment. And we started all getting like hundreds of emails opposing this guy. And so in the end, the lieutenant governor, for a while he like stood firm, but it was, you know, to the point where like we've gotten 600 emails against this guy. Like I'm not voting to affirm him to any board with this kind of community outcry in that community. And in the end, the lieutenant governor withdrew his name and appointed somebody else. So, you know, and to your question, I would say if you're better, coming down to lobbying and testifying is one thing. Writing emails and making phone calls is another thing. All good. But if there's something kind of in between, I would think it would be like trying to schedule an off-session brief meeting at the Capitol with a legislator. That way it's not intimidating, it's not a group, but you could sort of share your concerns, you know, and just in a very one-on-one or two-on-one, three-on-one with like-minded folks, you know, that would be less intimidating. So that would be better than emailing or calling. As long as you just might have to set it up a ways in ahead of time to try to get into their calendar and all that. But if you worked with their assistant and you are persistent, you should be able to get in. Yes?
Seems as though you're painting a picture here, at least for me, that the General Assembly is kind of a winner-take-all situation. The Republicans are the winners. They've got all of the power. Democrats get a few crumbs. So the Democrats who are actually elected officials in the General Assembly get a few crumbs, and by the same token, the Democrats, we and the populace, get a few crumbs. That's the best we can hope for. What strategy would reverse that so that the Democrats in the General Assembly actually have some real power? What would it take in terms of winning seats, getting some statewide officials elected? What would turn the tide to get some real power so that we're not just begging for some attention from these Republicans who are just going to do whatever they want to do?
Well, it's all true. And you know, it starts with the districts being gerrymandered. I mean, that's like the first thing.
What does any of this matter as long as the Democrats have no power? And what can the Democrats do to get some power?
Well, I wouldn't say none. I mean, it is very diminished and it is much less than it should be largely because of gerrymandering. But even within that, it's like we should have proportional representation on committees, and we don't. But that's one of those things that they get away with because it's in the weeds, and the public doesn't really know or care. So then therefore, no one's protesting it, and until there's enough noise protesting, they're gonna do whatever they can do. I mean, in general, okay? So like, they planned to push through that rigging districts bill until the public went ballistic. And then they were like, we're gonna get sued. Hundreds of people have shown up. Okay, can't get away with that. And then they didn't pass it. So it's not like there's nothing, but it does take smarts, maneuvering, people emailing and calling, and then more than anything else, voting, knocking on doors, giving money, supporting good candidates, and just trying to really capitalize on dissatisfaction with the way things are currently being run and tides turning in different districts to enhance real power. Like I said, just with Judson Hill gone, they couldn't pass all these really bad constitutional amendments. So that's a major thing. You know,
Do you think that's something that we could?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you've got the people here who will go out.
Absolutely.
And protest.
Yeah, and we've got our group that we're working on the anti-rigging districts legislation. So we're working on that. And then, you know, and I have seen like bad things fall apart because, you know, okay, say something is like bad, like horrible to us. Well, the chances are not bad. The chances are not terrible that it will be also disliked by some proportion of the Republican caucus. So therefore, there's always room to kind of, I mean, you know, to try to kill it. You have to like sort of maneuver and work with them and have the outcry be enough that it's not totally monolithic, like Democrats, Republicans, like in any issue people are like, and then they might be like not really liking that, and then if enough tides turn, so you can utilize them, like they are not all given up for dead at all times. So, you know, so there is opportunity
We could put guns on our college campus.
well, that is a huge problem, yeah, and only, actually, I think 3 or 4 of them voted no this time, but the rest just, you know, even though a lot of them didn't like it, some of them did, some of them think it's great, but others do not, so, yeah.
And maybe we already know this, but how can we support your independent districting legislation?
So what we're doing right now is there's a big list of groups. Do you want to tell them? You guys want to tell them a little bit about the recent conversations you've had?
Part of what's happening is there's a number of things going on.
Right.
One thing is going to be getting a better relationship with the Pro Georgia group so that we have a chance to interact with other groups in the city that are working on redistricting. So I think it's called Pro Georgia. It's a group of groups. So it's a lot of nonprofits that are working together, but they don't have the volunteers. And so there we are.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
what we can do is work with them to provide the voices and the feet to carry out some of the actions they want to do. We're all.
Can I add something
Sure.
about that? And one of the lovely things that's happened very recently is that now on the Pro Georgia meeting that is about specifically aimed at redistricting, now there are going to be members representing the redistricting work group, cross-indivisible work group. So it's a really lovely coming together that's just happening.
Right, it's all sort of
Just
plans,
now.
like the foundations have been being
Right,
laid over the
right.
last few months
Right.
for the unleashing to everybody, here are all the things we want you to do. Yeah.
I think the other thing that amazed me in this past part session was how by being together and going to hearings and speaking up, we started to have influence. Yeah, it's if you know the schedule, if you know something about how it works, and you get organized and you go, people will listen, even if it's point of just. Senator Parrott said, we're going to embarrass them. They're going to embarrass themselves if they see 200 people sitting there and saying, what are you doing? So the indivisible pattern really is an effective way of us going into the Georgia Assembly. And we're going to be working with Pro Georgia and Senator Parrott to plan a training conference in the late fall or early winter to prepare us better to understand more about what redistricting involves, what gerrymandering involves, and be prepared to speak out of a depth of knowledge. And we're speaking right now out of our passion and caring, but I think we need to know more. And so that we'll be letting you know more about planning for that meeting, which is going to be like a mini conference. It'll be many hours, 4 or 5 hours of training activities that will be planned to get us ready for the next session.
Right, and then there'll be aspects of that run like a campaign.
Yeah.
You know, like here's our targeted voter population. You know, these senators, these committees. Here are the things that we're going to do to try to move them this way. Kind of the same way a campaign strategist would consider, you know, what methods of communication might work. Yes.
I know that a couple of things we're using down in South in Chattahoochee Hills is we're having events, educational events. So we've had a gerrymandering event.
Oh, good.
That was open to the public, and we put the flyers in the libraries. And we're a heavy 80% Trump area. So
Even in Chattahoochee Hills?
oh, yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that red. And okay.
And then around that, and then around the area.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
So we just, and another thing we want to do is voter registration drive. But I'm interested, I was thinking that the voter registration should be nonpartisan because of how heavy it is in Chattahoochee Hills, just as a strategy, but I'd like to know your point of view about that, you know? Should we go nonpartisan, or, you know, anyways.
Well, it will be nonpartisan because in Georgia, you can't register by political party. So every time you vote in a primary, you have to decide which one you're going to vote in at that time. But like you could vote in the Democratic one time and then the Republican another. Although you cannot vote, like say you were voting in a race that then had a runoff, you can't switch in the middle of one campaign. You can vote for the first time and do the other one, but you can't. But other than that, like there are plenty of people who change. So that makes that easy. Like in Georgia, you are just registering people to be, exercise their franchise and be voters.
Okay.
Yeah.
About that, I
Yeah.
do think it's really important to get involved in voter registration drives, but they should be targeted because we don't want to register a lot of Republicans. And most places that will let you register voters, for example, we will be doing it at the Decatur Book Festival, as we have for years, and a bunch of other places. We will register anyone who wants to register to vote. But we know the neighborhoods, and we know the population that we're looking for, and we know where to go. The New Georgia Project is very, very involved in targeting minority voters in particular, young voters, and so on. Get involved with one of these groups. Registering voters, we have 800,000 minorities in this state that are not registered to vote.
Exactly.
So it's important not only for us to register them to vote, but to get them to the polls as well. And that was something that was done very, very well through the Ossoff primary. And so get with one of the groups or learn through the New Georgia Project or volunteer through them and let them have your name for the drives they do, because we're not going to win anything unless we get some of these people to the polls.
That's right. And remember that, like you said, Marsha, getting folks to the polls is not particularly easy if they are not someone who is at that time in their life particularly inclined to vote, right? Like sometimes, you have to follow up, sometimes a number of times.
Right, and the New Georgia Project and others do have the capabilities of keeping the names of these folks and contacting them, getting them to citizenship classes and so on, so that they understand how important
it is. Because yeah, if you're from like another country that's, doesn't really have a real democracy or is corrupt or whatever, it takes a long time before you have the wherewithal or even the belief to realize that you can make a difference, right? So, yeah.
I also wanted to just add one thing. Linda Gooding had raised the issue of the voting machine integrity, which you'd responded to. And I wanted just to let folks know that just like there's been this cross-indivisible redistricting work group, there is now starting to be a cross-indivisible work group related to voting machine integrity. Betsy, would you just, which Betsy Shackelford.
Yes, we should have already said that. Sorry, Betsy.
No, that's good. But so if folks are interested in working in that, we're really hoping with Elena's help also to do this, to put a lot of effort into this and move it quickly so that hopefully we can get something.
By 18, we could have, which would be just
so
fantastic.
if anybody's interested in that, to really be sure to touch base with Betsy.
If that's an area of interest, we have so many resources, articles, you name it, that explain the issues and solutions. So get me your email address and I'll be glad to hook you up with a whole bunch of stuff you can read, and if you want, take part in the efforts that we're going to do in advocacy in this group. And Nancy Larson up front is also on this Cross Indivisibles group.
Yeah, so much awesome work being done. I mean, just everyone always, especially in Georgia, like especially in the Deep South, it's one of those things where we have a taller hill, but it is not an insurmountable hill. But it's just one of those things where change around these parts is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Yes, we all really wanted Ossoff to really, stick it to him right away and show it all. But the reality is the talk about the networks that were built, the people in that vast part of Georgia who really, until this election, kind of I think the Democrats kind of hid. And now that's just not the case, and that district moved like 15 points or something massive. So, it's all just very exciting, but I always want to make sure everyone knows, after every disappointment, I'm like, oh man, this is hard. Like Hillary losing, I was like, okay, that was it. What on earth, you know? But then, you know, you get up and there's always another election. There's always more work to do, and there's always progress. Because even when Hillary lost, I was like, look, here's the silver side. We made progress in Georgia. We had actually picked up more seats in the House and Senate in Georgia. So that was good. And Hillary had won all these districts that never had been blue in Cobb and Gwinnett and all these other places. So that was huge. And for 2018, when we elect all of our constitutional officers, we're at such a disadvantage when the White House is in Democratic hands. I just, you know, I mean, it like was never enough for me to want Trump to win or anything. But we are at like a built-in disadvantage on the midterm when you have the White House. So I was like, that night I was like, all right, silver lining, more of an opportunity, lots more opportunity in 18 than we would have had if Hillary had won. So, yeah. Well, thank you all so much for everything you're doing.
Really thank Senator Parent for doing not just this, but I always think when I hear about Dumbledore's army, I feel like we all are Elena's army.